Cheops as his final resting place. But as we'll see, that is far from the truth. It certainly is a wonder, but a wonder far greater than most people realize. Strangely, the Great Pyramid has none of the normal characteristics of Egyptian tombs, like hieroglyphs, extravagant artifacts, ornate wall art, or elaborate coffins. Furthermore, the pyramid was aligned with the points of the compass with a precision that could only be matched by today's engineers. There are about 2.5 million stones, each weighing between 2 and 40 tons, and every one of them perfectly placed. The mathematics required for the unusually impeccable precision of the Great Pyramid's construction would be very advanced. Although, as normal, most of the pyramid was made of grey-yellow nummulite limestone, other, most unusual materials were also used, like rare granite lining the king and queen's chambers, and other rare forms of limestone covering the entire pyramid. But more of that later. In one of the greatest finds of this century, archaeologists have unearthed a 4,500-year-old papyrus, which describes how, unlike many other pyramids, highly skilled technicians led the construction by professional engineers to ensure its precise alignments, including, as now speculated, with the stars of Orion's belt as they were nearly 5,000 years ago. It was also constructed with unusual speed, 20 years at the most. So why the haste? Was it needed for something else? It's a puzzle, and the only way to solve a puzzle is to follow the clues. So, like true researchers, let's do just that. Many people don't realize that the pyramidal cap is missing. It was almost certainly made of solid gold, or gold-plated at the very least. Surely a huge cap of gold worth millions, possibly billions of dollars by today's value, was excessive, even for such an important pharaoh. Gold, as I'm sure you know, is one of the best conductors of electricity. And that's our first clue as to the real purpose of the pyramid. The second clue is the Great Pyramid's interior is incredibly complex, far too complex for a simple mausoleum. It comprises multiple chambers and shafts that are significantly different from the interiors of many of the other 180 pyramids of ancient Egypt. It was almost as if it were a kind of factory or machine with chambers of specialized granite, possibly containing materials or equipment, and then connected for some reason by these highly specialized shafts. The third clue is that the entire pyramid was originally covered by a thick layer of limestone comprising nearly 150,000 so-called casing stones, all highly polished, interlocking, and flat to an accuracy of 1/100th of an inch. It would have been an amazing sight, pure white and brilliant in the tropical sunlight. But it wasn't so much about decorating the pyramid. It had a practical and technical function, hence the extreme accuracy. One of the best electrical insulators is limestone, and the limestone used to coat the Great Pyramid is a rare form which was brought from nearby Tura. Unlike common limestone, Tura limestone does not contain magnesium, which has the effect of reducing its insulation properties. The Great Pyramid was, in effect, the perfect insulator of any electricity that might have been generated within, both containing it and controlling it. The fourth clue is that a rare type of granite, rose granite, was used to construct some of the chambers in the pyramid and was transported more than 500 miles downriver from Aswan. Granite contains silica oxide, better known as the crystal quartz, and the Aswan granite used for the lining of the king and queen's chambers is almost pure quartz, 85%. Why is that important? Well, if you squeeze quartz and many other crystalline substances, static electricity is generated by the compression and movement of the atomic lattices. This is known as the piezoelectric effect, and thousands of years later is used in many forms of our technology. For example, if you have a record turntable, the stylus is typically a diamond crystal or a sapphire crystal that gets bounced from side to side along the grooves. This bouncing compresses or distorts these crystals, generating electricity, which is amplified to make the sounds we can hear. If the ancient Egyptian scientists could find a way to compress the quartz granite inside the pyramid's chambers, electricity would be generated, fully insulated by the limestone covering, and therefore the charge would have no choice but to find its way to the place of least electrical resistance, namely the gold cap. So, the only remaining clue we have to find is to see if there's any concrete evidence about how the ancient Egyptians could have compressed the quartz crystals in the granite body of the pyramid. And that clue is in the nature of the otherwise inexplicable trace chemicals found in two of the shafts. What are these chemicals that really have no place within a burial mausoleum? First, there are traces of hydrochloric acid in the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber, and of hydrated zinc chloride in the northern shaft. If these chemicals are brought together in a confined place, they react very strongly, releasing huge quantities of hydrogen gas. In his book, The Giza Power Plant, Technologies of Ancient Egypt, Christopher Dunn explains the entire process in detail. Step 1. As we've said, the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber contained hydrochloric acid, and the northern shaft contained hydrated zinc chloride, but they were kept at separate ends because they can react together so violently. Step 2. When these chemicals were deliberately mixed together, released towards each other down the shafts and into the Queen's Chamber, huge quantities of hydrogen gas would have been released. Step 3. This pressurized hydrogen gas could only flow into the Grand Gallery. Unusually, the Queen's Chamber's shafts do not vent externally. After entering the Grand Gallery, the gas passed through 27 mechanical resonators, whose fixings are still in place. Resonance is simply the sound you get if, for example, you blow air across the top of an empty bottle. This sound is, in effect, highly excited, turbulent kinetic energy, which can be used for Step 4. After travelling through the Grand Gallery, the turbulent hydrogen was forced into the King's Chamber, where that rhythmical sound energy, created by the resonators, would pulsate against the granite walls, floor and ceiling, compressing and distorting the quartz, and through the piezoelectric effect that we looked at earlier, generate electricity. The Great Pyramid, by all the evidence and science available, may have been the engine of a great power plant, where hydrogen gas was used to create electricity that, indeed, could have been beamed wirelessly around the world, emitted by that gold cap in a way that is exactly the same as Nikola Tesla's amazing proposal for wireless electricity, a proposal that disappeared along with most of his papers. There is some evidence that the ancient Maya and other cultures were producing similar energy, forming a huge electromagnetic network in the ionosphere, which, it is suggested, might have been harnessed by UFOs. But in fairness, this is just speculation, fascinating though it is, and we are concerned here with hard, provable facts. Dr. Brett I. Cohen has proposed a somewhat modified version of the theory. Again, it's based on observable facts, but coming to a slightly different scientific explanation of how the pressure waves that compressed the granite were created. Apparently, according to Dr. Cohen, a highly respected physical scientist, there were traces of sulfuric acid in the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber, not hydrochloric acid, as Christopher Dunn has claimed. And in the northern shaft there is ammonium chloride, as well as zinc chloride. Both of these could produce hydrogen without being mixed. And if that excited hydrogen were mixed with oxygen, just from the air, possibly by some form of blast furnace technique, a very powerful chemical explosion would occur. This explosion would create a massive blast wave or pressure wave, which, as with Christopher Dunn's explanation, would travel through the Grand Gallery and into the King's Chamber, violently compressing the granite walls, floor and ceiling, and thus creating electricity. A problem with this explanation is that when the hydrogen and oxygen react to produce an explosion, they also produce water, as we all know, and it would be in huge quantities. Where would it go? Luckily, there is a simple answer. Recently, aquifers, layers of trapped water, have been found directly beneath the Great Pyramid's mysterious subterranean shafts and chambers. Presumably, it's somewhere to drain the water. Because, let's face it, dead pharaohs are not likely to need a water supply. But wouldn't there be evidence of these explosions? Recent research has uncovered a dark stain on the granite upper wall and ceiling of the Grand Gallery, where the explosions would have taken place. These stains appear to be the remnants of charring from heat. Furthermore, cracks have been discovered in the granite beams in the ceiling of the King's Chamber by renowned Egyptologist Stephen Mahler. When the blast of super-hot gas rushed from the Grand Gallery into the King's Chamber, the pressure would, of course, have been enormous. It is entirely possible that apart from the piezoelectric compression, some actual damage would eventually occur, hence the cracks. But that's not the only evidence of controlled explosions. The Great Step outside the King's Chamber has evidently suffered extensive damage. Dozens of cubic feet have been blasted away. None of this damage is recent. It has been dated through analysis to the 5th century before Common Era. So what can we conclude from this? Through controlled chemical reactions in the connecting shafts, hydrogen gas was produced in the Queen's Chamber. This gas was either mixed with oxygen and thus exploded to create huge pressure waves, or was made turbulent by being passed over mechanical resonators. Either way, these pressure waves passed through the Grand Gallery to be trapped in the King's Chamber, where they would compress the granite walls, floor and ceiling, and thus create electricity in huge quantities through the piezoelectric effect. Therefore, it is entirely scientifically possible that the Great Pyramid at Giza was being used to generate electricity thousands and thousands of years before its so-called discovery in the West. Inevitably, there are those who dispute the theory of energy generation in the Great Pyramid. However, facts are facts, and it is a fact that the pyramid is constructed from rare granite with piezoelectric properties, that the pyramid is fully insulated with rare limestone, and that it was capped with gold, one of the best natural conductors of electricity. Skeptics can try and dispute the electricity generation theory, but the science holds up. And if the science holds up, then a theory is valid. So why do people so vehemently pooh-pooh this theory? It's probably down to simple psychology. Every generation tends to think that it is the most advanced one that has ever existed, that earlier civilizations are inevitably more primitive than we are. Actually, in the minds of many, more stupid than we are. And the fact that you are interested in early civilizations and their achievements shows that, thankfully, you have the intelligence to avoid this arrogant prejudice. Indeed, this arrogance is harmful to our understanding of the story of human civilization and our appreciation that, as Sir Isaac Newton said, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. For example, at school we were taught that the blast furnace was invented in Europe only a few hundred years ago, and yet the Chinese, without doubt, were using it nearly 2,000 years ago for the production of high-quality steel for their farm tools and weapons. We started with a puzzle, and we have followed the clues, the evidence and the science. And in conclusion, we are left with two simple questions. First, is there definitive proof that the Great Pyramid at Giza was used by the ancient Egyptians for the production of electricity? Whilst there is some most convincing evidence, the answer, at the moment, has to be no. More evidence is needed. But second, is it scientifically and technically possible that it could have been used for that? And the inescapable, provable answer is